Woman falls ill every time she eats at her in-laws. What she discovers shocks everyone. She sat at the edge of the dining table, smiling politely, nodding along to the small talk and laughter. From the outside, everything looked fine. Her dress was elegant. Her hair was styled just right, and she sat beside her husband like the perfect picture of a happy wife. But inside, her stomach was turning, not just from nerves. It was something else. This wasn't the first time she'd felt this way. Not by a long shot. It happened almost every time she ate here, in this house, at this table. And for a long time, she told herself it was just coincidence. Maybe a sensitive stomach. Maybe nerves from trying too hard to fit in. But today was different. She hadn't touched the food. She brought her own dish this time, quietly, carefully. No one noticed. She thought maybe she'd finally enjoy a peaceful dinner. But the moment she saw her mother-in-law's expression, just for a second, when she reached for her own container instead of accepting what was on her plate, she knew something was off. That look. Cold, tight-lipped, almost disappointed. Her heart pounded, but she kept her expression calm. Just a family dinner, right? It had only been 7 months since she and her husband got married, and in that time, they'd spent almost every Sunday evening in this large, beautiful house with his family. The house was spotless, the table always full, and his mother always greeted her with the same sugary, sweet smile. "Welcome, my dear," she would say, kissing the air near her cheek. "You're looking so much better than last time. That stomach of yours is just too sensitive." But it wasn't just about being sick. It was the glances that lingered a bit too long. The comments about how some people weren't raised around fine dining. The way his mother always found a reason to bring up his ex-girlfriend. Always present, always perfect. At first, she didn't want to say anything. Her husband loved his mom. He adored his family. And she didn't want to seem dramatic or ungrateful. She told herself to be strong, to let it go. But that strength started to wear down after every meal turned into a night spent in the bathroom, sweating, shivering, in pain. And yet, nobody else ever got sick. Not her husband, not the others. Just her. She started to pay closer attention. She noticed how her plate was always served last, how her portion always looked just a little different, and how her mother-in-law's eyes never quite met hers when handing her the food. Her husband always laughed it off. "You probably just can't handle all the butter Mom uses," he'd say, rubbing her back. But deep down, something didn't feel right. So today, she made a decision. She cooked her own meal at home and packed it quietly in a sealed container. When they arrived, she smiled, hugged everyone, and when it was time to eat, she simply said she wasn't feeling well and would prefer to eat something light she brought from home. No one objected. No one said anything, except for that one look, that one strange moment when her mother-in-law's smile faltered, but she played along. "Of course, dear, whatever helps your tummy." The evening went on, laughter around the table, casual conversation, and a few too many comments about how some dishes just take years to master. She smiled through it all, ate her own food, and waited. For the first time in months, her stomach felt fine, calm, no nausea, no headache. She caught her mother-in-law watching her, eyebrows just slightly drawn together, fingers tightening around her wine glass. Something had shifted. The woman who once smiled too sweetly was now oddly quiet, observing, calculating, and just like that, the pieces in her mind began to connect. The discomfort, the patterns, the difference in portions. It wasn't just in her head. Something had been wrong all along, and now she had proof. But what was she supposed to do with it? Tell her husband that his own mother might have been intentionally making her sick? Would he even believe her? Would she risk being seen as paranoid or dramatic, or worse? What if it was true? and he did believe her. What would happen to his relationship with his mother, with his family? She looked over at her husband. He was laughing, completely unaware. His hand brushed hers under the table, and she smiled gently. He loved her. She knew that. But what she also knew now, without a doubt, was that someone at this table didn't. And the truth was only just starting to show. The next morning, she stood in the kitchen, holding a warm mug of tea between her hands, trying to make sense of what had happened the night before. For once, she'd come home from her in-laws' house without rushing to the bathroom or curling up in bed from nausea. And yet, sleep had been nearly impossible. She kept replaying the look on her mother-in-law's face, the flicker of surprise, the slight tightening around her mouth, the polite nod that came just a beat too late when she'd refused the dinner plate. Something about that moment stayed with her like a shadow. Her husband walked in, stretching and yawning, and leaned in to kiss her cheek. "You slept okay?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yeah, better than usual, actually." "That's good," he said, opening the fridge. "I was kind of surprised you didn't eat Mom's pot roast last night. She made that just for you." She gave a soft laugh, masking the tension under her smile. "I just didn't want to risk getting sick again. I thought it was safer to eat what I brought." He nodded, grabbing the orange juice. "I mean, it could be something in her cooking that your stomach just doesn't agree with. Maybe some ingredient you don't realize you're sensitive to." She wanted to say more, but the words caught in her throat. Not yet. Not until she was sure. Not until she had something he couldn't explain away. As the week passed, her thoughts didn't settle. If her body had reacted every time, she'd eaten there but not when she skipped the food, then something was clearly wrong. But how could she accuse someone of doing that on purpose? Especially his mother. It sounded too cruel, too calculated. Still, something inside her wouldn't let it go. On Thursday, she met up with her closest friend at a small cafe downtown. The one person she could talk to without being brushed off or told she was overthinking things again. She stirred her coffee slowly. "I know how it sounds. I feel like I'm losing it, but what if it's not just bad luck or food allergies? What if she's doing something to my food?" Her friend blinked. "Wait, are you saying she's poisoning you?" She winced at the word. "I don't want to say it like that. I don't even know what it would be. But it's always only my plate. And I always get sick. No one else does, not once." Her friend leaned in, whispering, "Now, that's not normal, girl. That's not just a coincidence. You need to trust your gut on this." "But what if I'm wrong?" she whispered back. "What if I ruin everything just because I'm paranoid? And what if you're right? But you stay quiet and let her keep hurting you." Her friend shot back gently. "You need to watch her next time. Closely. Don't eat anything she gives you. Swap plates if you have to." The idea planted itself in her mind, firm and unsettling. Could she really do that? Could she pretend to go along with everything, only to secretly test her theory? That Sunday, they were invited again. She didn't want to go, but she couldn't not go either. Not without raising questions. So she got dressed, put on her earrings, and painted on a smile. Her husband squeezed her hand in the car. "Mom said she's making lasagna tonight. She said she hopes your appetite is better this week." "I'm feeling okay," she lied, forcing a nod. But in her purse, she had antacids, ginger drops, a small notebook. She was ready this time. The house looked the same, polished, glowing, picture perfect. And so did the smiles. Her mother-in-law opened the door with her usual sing-song greeting. "Welcome, I made something special for you again," she said, reaching for a hug that felt more like a performance than affection. "Thank you," she said, matching the smile. "I'm really looking forward to it." Dinner was served with its usual flair. Her plate came out last, of course. It always did. As everyone started digging in, She quietly reached across and switched plates with her husband before he noticed. He was too busy chatting with his father to see. She watched her mother-in-law's face carefully. There it was again, that pause, that flicker. She said nothing, just took a tiny bite of the new plate, the one her husband was meant to eat. It tasted fine. It tasted normal. But about 20 minutes in, she noticed him slow down. His fork clinked against the plate as he stopped eating, pressing a hand to his stomach. "Hey, you okay?" she asked gently, already knowing the answer. "I don't. No, I feel a little off," he said, confused. "Like dizzy or something." Her mother-in-law's eyes went wide for just a second. Then she smiled. "Oh no, not you two. Must be something going around." And that's when she knew. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was real. She looked at her husband, his face pale, his brow creased, and a part of her heart broke. Because now she had what she needed. Proof. But also a truth she wished she didn't have to face. This was no accident. This was a warning, and it had just hit the person she loved most. He sat in the passenger seat, slouched slightly, his eyes closed and face pale. The drive home was quiet, but not peaceful. Every few minutes he would take a deep breath, like trying to push away the discomfort in his stomach. She didn't say much. Not yet. She just kept her hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, but her mind was racing. He was sick, just like she always had been. And this time, he had eaten her portion. The same portion his mother had so generously prepared especially for her. It couldn't be denied anymore. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't sensitive. She wasn't overthinking. Something was happening in that house. Something wrong. And now, he had felt it too. When they finally reached home, he headed straight for the couch, lying down with a sigh. She brought him some water and sat next to him, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I don't get it," he murmured. "I didn't even eat much." She turned to look at him. "Do you remember which plate you ate from?" He frowned. "Yours, right? You said you weren't hungry, so you gave me your plate." There it was. The moment. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I wanted to test something." His brow furrowed. "Test?" She took a deep breath. "I've been getting sick after your mom's dinners for months now, but only at her place. Never at home. Never anywhere else." He sat up slightly, watching. "Her?" "I started paying attention. My plate always looked different. I'm always served last, and I always feel sick within the hour," she said, her voice shaking just slightly. "So tonight I switched plates." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. "You think my mom is doing something to your food?" he asked slowly, like he couldn't quite believe the words coming out of his own mouth. "I didn't want to," she whispered. "I really didn't. But what other explanation is there?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. No, she wouldn't do that. That's not... She's my mom." "I know," she said softly. "And that's why I kept quiet for so long. Because I didn't want to come between you and her. I still don't. But I couldn't keep getting sick. I couldn't keep pretending." He rubbed his hands over his face, overwhelmed. Why would she do that? Maybe she wants me gone," she said. "Maybe she thinks I don't belong. That I'm not who she pictured as your wife." He didn't answer right away, because deep down, he knew. He'd seen the way his mother treated her. Always smiling, always polite, but never warm. Always comparing her to someone else. Always throwing in those little comments that sounded harmless but never quite felt that way. She reached out, touching his hand gently. "I didn't want you to find out like this. But now that it's happened to you, now you know I wasn't making it up." His eyes lifted to hers, full of confusion, disbelief, and something else. Guilt. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I should have seen it. I should have listened when you first said something felt off." She squeezed his hand. "You didn't want to believe something bad about someone you love. That doesn't make you a bad person. But now, we can't ignore it." He sat back again, shaking his head slowly. I need to think." She let him be. She didn't press. They spent the rest of the evening in quiet, side by side but wrapped in separate thoughts. That night, as they got into bed, he pulled her close and whispered, "We need to talk to her." "I know," she said. "But I don't want to go back there alone. Not again." "You won't," he said. "Next time, we go together, and we ask her everything." The following weekend came faster than expected. They didn't RSVP to the family dinner, but they did show up, unannounced. She felt the nerves building in her chest as they pulled into the driveway. He parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a second. "You sure?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm ready." They walked up to the door together, hand in hand. His mother opened it with a familiar smile, though it faltered when she saw their faces. "Oh, I didn't expect you tonight," she said. "We need to talk," her son said, gently but firmly. The woman stepped aside, letting them in. The house felt colder than usual, quieter, like it knew something was about to happen. They sat in the living room, and his mother perched on the edge of her chair, hands folded neatly, that same too-sweet expression painted on her face. He didn't waste time. "Why have you been serving my wife different food?" he asked. Her eyes didn't move. "I don't know what you mean." "You do," he said. "I ate her food last week, and I got sick, just like she always does." "Why is that?" The room felt like it stopped breathing. His mother's mouth tightened. Then, for a moment, her smile slipped. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice lower now. "I was just trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" he asked, leaning forward. "From the woman I love?" She looked. Between them. "From making a mistake." He stood. "No? The only mistake was trusting that you'd treat my wife with respect." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but he was already walking toward the door. His wife followed, her heart pounding, her hands cold. They didn't need to say anything else. The truth was out, and now everything would change. The ride home was heavier than the silence between them. Neither of them spoke. Not even the sound of the radio playing in the background could fill the space between what had just happened and what they were supposed to do next. She looked at her husband, his jaw tight, his grip on the steering wheel a little too firm. His face was blank, but his eyes weren't. His eyes were full of disappointment, hurt, and something deeper. Something that looked like disbelief turning into understanding. "You okay?" she finally asked, her voice soft. He didn't answer at first. He kept his eyes on the road. Then finally, "I feel like my whole childhood just cracked." She reached out, placing her hand gently on his. "I know." He looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her want to cry. It wasn't just pain. It was the look of someone who had just seen their parent as a stranger. "She didn't even deny it," he said. "She just said she was trying to protect me. From you. Like you were a threat." "I was never trying to take you away from her," she said. "I just wanted to be part of the family." He nodded, swallowing hard. "You've been more patient than I ever had the right to ask for." That night, they barely slept. She laid awake beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, knowing he wasn't asleep either. And in the morning, when the first text arrived from his mother, they both stared at the screen in silence. "I hope you understand. I did what I thought was right. I still love you, both of you. No apology." No acknowledgement of what she had done, just justification. And that's when it really hit her. His mother hadn't just hurt her, she was still convinced she was right. That made it worse. Over the next week, the tension didn't disappear. It changed shape. The phone calls came in, some from his father, others from cousins or family friends who had already heard whispers. The story had started to spread, like stories do in tight family circles. But no one really knew the whole truth. Not yet. "What are we going to say?" she asked him one evening as they sat in the kitchen staring at their untouched dinner. "The truth," he said simply. "They deserve to know, and you deserve not to carry this in silence anymore." She hesitated. What if they take her side? What if they say I'm just stirring things up? He looked at her then, not with anger, but with something fierce in his voice. "Then that tells us who they are, who really cares. Because if anyone thinks it's okay to treat you the way she has, they were never really family to begin with." She didn't respond. She just nodded and leaned into his shoulder, letting the quiet moment say everything they couldn't. A few days later, she met her best friend again, needing someone who wasn't tied to the drama, someone who could see the situation clearly, without history or guilt in the way. "She didn't even try to deny it?" her friend asked, stirring her tea too aggressively. "No," she said, watching the steam rise from her cup. "She just said she thought he was making a mistake marrying me." "And your husband? Is he on your side?" Her eyes softened. "He is now. I think seeing it for himself changed everything." "Good," her friend said firmly. "You deserve that. And honestly, I'm proud of you. You didn't shout. You didn't fight dirty. You just stood your ground and let the truth show itself." She smiled, a tired one, but real. "I just wish it hadn't hurt so much." The next invitation came a week later. Another dinner. A chance to talk things out as a family, according to the message. But this time, she didn't go blindly. This time, she had her eyes wide open. When they arrived, she noticed the subtle changes. The way the usual laughter in the house was replaced by cautious glances. The way her mother-in-law smiled a little too hard. The way Sarah, yes, Sarah again, was already seated comfortably in the living room, talking to her husband's father like she'd always belonged. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest. But this time, she didn't shrink back. She stood, taller, dinner was served. Once again, her plate came last, and once again, it looked slightly different. Without hesitation, she calmly pushed it to the side. "I'm not eating this," she said softly, but clearly. "Not until someone else tries it first." Silence. Her husband looked up sharply. Her mother-in-law froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" the older woman asked, voice a little too light, a little too high-pitched. "You know what it means," she replied. "And I'm done pretending I don't notice." Her husband slowly stood up, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he said, "if you think there's nothing wrong with this food, prove it." His mother stared at him, eyes flicking toward Sarah, who now looked incredibly uncomfortable. "I made that for her, not for me," she said, smiling with a little too much effort. "Exactly," her daughter-in-law replied. That was the turning point, not a big explosion, not yelling or a dramatic exit, just a quiet shift of power. For the first time, she wasn't playing defense. She wasn't begging to belong. She was claiming her space, with dignity. She stood up from the table, placed the untouched plate down with a calm hand, and looked her mother-in-law in the eye. "I'm not going to let you decide my worth anymore. I don't need your approval, but I do expect respect. That's the bare minimum." And with that, she turned and walked out. Her husband followed. This time, not out of confusion or loyalty to his wife, but out of clarity. He had finally seen the full picture, and he was ready to stop pretending too. the sound of the door closing behind them felt like a final period on a chapter that had been dragging on too long. She stepped onto the porch first, the cool night air hitting her flushed face. Her husband followed quietly, the silence between them charged, but not with tension, with understanding. They didn't say anything on the drive home. There were no dramatic tears, no immediate rehashing of what had just happened, just the occasional glance at one another as if silently checking, "Are you okay? Are we still okay?" She looked out the window, watching the streetlights blur past. Her mind wasn't calm, not even close, but there was a stillness inside her she hadn't felt in months, maybe even since the wedding. For the first time, she had stopped trying to win approval. She had chosen herself, and he had chosen her too. Later that night, she curled up on the couch, legs tucked beneath her as she stared at her untouched cup of tea. He sat beside her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I never wanted this," he said finally, his voice soft. "I just wanted us to be a family." "I know," she replied. "I thought, if I waited long enough, kept the peace, maybe things would change. Maybe she'd come around." "She didn't," she said gently. He nodded. "But you did. You came back. You tried. Over and over, and she just kept pushing." She looked at him, really looked, and she saw a different version of the man she married, one who had finally stopped making excuses, one who had chosen truth, even when it hurt. "I love you," she said. He turned to her. "I love you too." They sat in silence, but it was a better silence now, one that didn't weigh them down. A silence that felt like a breath of relief after months of holding it in. The next morning brought something she didn't expect. A letter. It was slipped under their door. No knock, no text. Just an envelope with her name on it in handwriting that had once written her birthday cards with "Dear Sweet Girl." Now it just said her name. No dear, no warmth. She hesitated before opening it. Her husband stood nearby, watching her cautiously. Inside was a short note. No apology. Just an explanation, if you could call it that. "I'm sorry things turned out this way. I just always pictured a different kind of woman for my son. Someone from our world. Someone who understood our way of life. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. But I needed to protect my family." She folded the letter slowly. Not a single sorry for what she actually did. "Not really," he said. "She still doesn't think she did anything wrong. She thinks it's about compatibility, class, background. She doesn't see the manipulation. Or the damage," she added. That afternoon, she threw the letter away. Not out of anger, but out of decision. She didn't need it. Didn't need to keep holding on to the words of someone who wasn't trying to understand her. She wasn't at war with his mother anymore, because she had stopped playing that game altogether. But life didn't pause. The texts kept coming. A cousin, wanting to get coffee and chat. A sister-in-law asking what really happened. A voicemail from his father, unsure how to approach the mess without taking sides. Everyone was waiting for a version of the story that made sense to them. Something neat and digestible. But real life didn't work that way. Especially not when people you love turn into people you no longer recognize. One evening, as she folded laundry, her husband sat down beside her on the floor. "I talked to my dad," he said. She looked at him. He said he had a feeling for a while that something wasn't right. But he didn't want to cause conflict. She raised an eyebrow. "So he knew?" "Not everything," he said, "but enough to realize Mom was trying to control the narrative." She folded another shirt. "That's what she does best." He asked if we'd be open to a family meeting. Not with everyone. Just us. him, maybe mom, with a therapist present. She didn't answer right away. Then, only if it's on our terms. I told him that, he said. We set the rules, or, it doesn't happen, she nodded. Then maybe, it was a small step, but it mattered. Not for reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But for boundaries. For healing. Whether or not someone else was ready for it. Days passed, then weeks. They didn't go back to Sunday dinners. Instead, they spent weekends walking, in parks, cooking together, inviting friends over who felt more like family than those related by blood. They laughed more, talked more, reconnected. The shadow of his mother's disapproval still lingered, but it no longer took up the whole room. One Sunday morning, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at a photo of him as a kid, held in his mother's arms. She used to love me like I was her whole world, he said, almost to himself. Now I'm not sure she even sees me anymore. She sat beside him. Maybe she only sees the version of you that fits her world. He nodded. But I don't fit that version anymore. And maybe I never did. He looked at her. I fit this. Us. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Then we're good. And they were. Not perfect, not untouched by pain, but good. They were building something new, not just a life together, but a home. One not built on silent suffering or forced approval, but on truth, choice, and hard-earned love. It had been a quiet 3 months since that last dinner, the one where she slid the untouched plate away and left the table not with an argument, but with her dignity intact. And the silence after that night had been loud in its own way. No surprise visits, no guilt-tripping texts. Not even another envelope slipped under the door. It was strange how peace could feel so unfamiliar. She had expected fallout, maybe a storm of judgment, or worse, denial. But instead, there was space. And that space had given her and her husband room to breathe, talk, and slowly rebuild what had been quietly breaking under pressure for so long. They had learned how to cook together, how to rest without guilt, how to let laughter live in their home again. Not just love, but safety. And that felt like a miracle. Until one morning, her husband's phone buzzed, his father's name on the screen. He answered, and his face changed as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at her with a careful expression. She's been going to therapy, he said quietly. She didn't speak, just waited. She admitted everything, not just to the therapist, to my dad, to the rest of the family too. She told them what she did, and why. And what was the reason? She asked, though she already knew. He hesitated. Fear. Pride. Her version of love. She thought she was protecting me. From you. From change. From a life she didn't understand. She nodded. And now? She wants to meet. With us. In front of someone neutral. No tricks. No fake apologies. Just a conversation. She looked at him for a long time. I don't know if I want to see her, she admitted. I don't know if I do either, he replied. They sat in that honesty together, and that was the first step forward. A week later, they walked into a quiet, sunlit room where a calm-eyed therapist waited with a clipboard and a warm smile. His mother was already there. She looked smaller, not physically, but emotionally. Her hair wasn't perfectly set. Her clothes were simple. Her face wasn't made up with that flawless, unbothered look she always wore like armor. She looked real, vulnerable, tired. But she stood up when they walked in. Not to hug, but simply to acknowledge. Thank you for coming, she said. They nodded and all three sat. The therapist opened the session with a soft voice. Today isn't about fixing everything. It's about understanding, speaking honestly, and listening without interruption. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then, his mother began. "I was wrong," she said. Not a dramatic speech, just 3 words. But they shook the air. I convinced myself that what I was doing came from love, that if I just pushed hard enough, if I made her seem unstable, unfit, maybe you'd come to your senses and choose the life I had pictured for you. Her voice wavered. But it wasn't love. It was control. It was fear. And it was cruel. She looked at her daughter-in-law for the first time, really looked at her. Not through judgment, but through guilt. I poisoned the trust between us. I poisoned the safety of my own home. And worst of all, I almost ruined the best relationship my son has ever had. I have no excuse. And I won't ask you to forgive me. Not now. Maybe not ever. I just want you to know. I'm trying. I'm learning. And I see you now. Really see you. The room was still. Her husband sat beside her, holding her hand. Not tightly, not for comfort, but for support. She took a deep breath. "I'm not ready to trust you," she said honestly. "You broke something I don't know how to fix, but I appreciate that. You're not pretending anymore. That's a start." His mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "That's fair." "And I'm not coming back to family dinners right away," she added. "I need space. We need space." "You'll have it," the older woman whispered. "And if one day you're open to trying again, I'll be here. And I'll do better. I'll be better." The therapist gently closed the session, reminding them all that progress isn't always visible, and healing rarely comes in one conversation. As they left, no hugs were exchanged. But there was a shift in the air. Not forgiveness. Not reunion, but something that had been missing for a long time. Truth. In the weeks that followed, there were no sudden reunions, no emotional family photos, just small things. A card in the mail, handwritten, thoughtful. A message on a holiday, not asking for anything, just wishing them peace. The effort was different now, quiet, respectful, on their terms. And slowly, bit by bit, her heart softened, not because she forgot, but because the anger no longer served her. She had what she needed, a partner who saw her, loved her, stood beside her not just in romance, but in reality. And a voice that she had reclaimed, after spending so long silencing it for the sake of peace. Now, peace looked different. It wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about being seen, heard, and valued. One sunny afternoon, as they unpacked groceries, together in their kitchen, he paused and looked at her. "You know," he said, smiling softly, "we never got around to making your family's stew recipe. The one you said your grandma taught you?" She smiled. "I think we're overdue." And as they cooked side by side, laughing, chopping, tasting, she realized something. She hadn't just survived a toxic pattern, she had rewritten it. In their home, love wasn't tested by silence, it was proven in truth. And that was more than enough. The seasons changed. Autumn leaves had fallen and melted into the sidewalks, and now the early spring sun filtered through the living room window like a gentle promise. The kind that doesn't shout but stays. She sat on the couch in her favorite sweater, hands wrapped around a warm mug, staring at a small pot of lavender she'd placed on the windowsill. Her mother used to say lavender meant healing. Maybe that's why she kept watering it, even when she wasn't sure it would bloom. Behind her, laughter floated from the kitchen. Her husband was on a video call with his dad. The two of them had started reconnecting, slowly, carefully. No pressure, just honest conversations, often beginning with silence and ending with something real. She wasn't part of every call, and she didn't need to be. Trust didn't have to mean total return. Sometimes it just meant space without resentment, and that was enough. One afternoon, she found herself sorting through a box of old letters and wedding cards they had stashed away. Months earlier, too tired at the time to open everyone. Inside, she found a letter she'd missed. Not from his mother, from his grandmother. The woman had always stayed neutral, never took sides. But in the note, her words were clear. It's hard watching people you love make mistakes, and harder still to admit when we've made them ourselves. I see your strength. I see your patience. And if she doesn't know it yet, I pray one day she will. It brought tears to her eyes, not from pain, but from the quiet relief of being seen, even if only in a few words. She folded the letter and placed it in her journal. Some things deserve to be remembered. A few weeks later, a message arrived, simple, unobtrusive. I'd like to invite you both to dinner. No expectations, no obligations, just food. If you're not ready, I understand. Either way, I'll leave a plate at the door. It was from her, not a demand, not a manipulation, just a quiet offering. She stared at the screen for a long time before showing her husband. He looked at it, then looked at her. You decide, he said gently. And for the first time, she didn't feel pressure. She didn't feel tested, she felt trusted. They didn't respond right away. They didn't rush to make a decision. They just let the message sit like a pebble dropped into water, sending ripples out in every direction. But on the day of the dinner, just as the sun began to dip behind the trees, they drove over, not to eat, just to talk. The house looked the same, but something felt different, lighter. Or maybe she had changed. Maybe she just wasn't carrying the same fear anymore. When they walked in, the dining table was already set. No extra guests, no grand gestures, just 3 plates and one small vase of wildflowers in the center. Her mother-in-law stood at the kitchen counter, stirring something quietly. When she turned, her hand stilled. I didn't expect you to come, she said. We weren't sure we would, her son replied. She nodded, and something in her posture softened. I don't want to talk about the past tonight, not unless you ask me to. I just want to feed you, properly, equally. There was a quiet pause. Then, that's a start, the daughter-in-law said. They didn't sit right away. She wandered through the house instead, noticing things. A framed photo of their wedding now on the hallway shelf. A small book of affirmations resting on the coffee table. Things she'd never noticed before. Or maybe things that hadn't been there until now. At the table, everything was the same size, same spoonfuls, same dishes, no special portions, no hidden messages in polite words, just food, warm, safe, and silence that didn't feel threatening anymore. When they left that evening, they didn't make promises. They didn't commit to weekly visits. But her mother-in-law handed her a small box before she stepped out the door. Inside, back home, she opened it. It was a handwritten recipe card, the family stew, the real one. No secrets, no missing ingredients, no drama. At the bottom of the card, written in different handwriting, shaky but careful, was a line. You're part of this family now, if you'll still have us. She folded the card slowly and placed it in the kitchen drawer, right next to her own recipe journal. A new chapter, maybe. One with conditions. One with caution. But also, possibility. Months passed, then a year, and life moved forward, as it does. They had new routines, new traditions. Some Sunday dinners happened at their home now, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends, sometimes when they felt ready, even with her, but always with balance, with mutual respect, and with clear boundaries that everyone had finally learned to honor. Not every relationship was repaired fully. Not every scar faded. But what they built wasn't fake. It was real. It was earned. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, she caught her husband watching her with that same look he used to give her when they were just dating, like he was still a little in awe that she'd chosen him. "What?" she laughed, teasing. He stepped forward, wrapped his arms around her, resting, his chin on her shoulder. "I was just thinking," he said, "how lucky I am you never gave up on us." She leaned into him, smiling softly. "I didn't give up. I just stopped fighting battles I didn't start. And that made all the difference," he whispered. They stood there for a while, just holding each other in the soft kitchen light, the scent of stew filling the air, and a new kind of quiet settling between them. Not the silence of avoidance, but the stillness of peace. She hadn't just protected her heart. She had protected their future, and in doing so, she had taught everyone around her that real love doesn't demand silence or sacrifice of self. It invites truth, it holds space for change, and it begins again, sometimes quietly, but always bravely, because love rooted in honesty can survive even the deepest betrayal and grow something beautiful from it.